What is Black Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter is a movement to bring justice, healing, and freedom to Black people across the globe by addressing systemic racism and violence against Black people. In 2013, 3 Black organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created Black Lives Matter in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. Now a global movement, Black Lives Matter members organize locally to intervene in discrimination and violence inflicted on Black communities. Black Lives Matter does not mean that other people's lives don't matter. Instead, it brings attention to the fact that right now, our society, systems, and institutions act as if Black lives don't matter. This is brought home in the starkest possible way as we witness Black people dying at the hands of police at much higher rates than other people. By valuing and affirming Black people's lives, their humanity, their contributions, we all will benefit as a society.
And what we mean by that when we say Black Lives Matter, Grassroots is Black Lives Matter, is that Black Lives Matter was born in the spirit of struggle. We were born July 13th, 2013, the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. We poured ourselves out into the streets and poured our blood, sweat, and tears into building a movement, not a moment. A movement, not a moment. We're going to continue to do the work to make Black Lives Matter. Whether we win in court or we win in the streets, we're going to win because our people demand it.
James for live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative. The Conversation Live starts now. Welcome to another episode of The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Coming up today, Dr. Melina Abdullah is in the seat. We're going to unpack 10 years of Black Lives Matter turning 10. The People's Justice Festival, also some recent news about the BLM lawsuit against the Global Foundation. But first, we want to check in with our underwriters and we'll get to Dr. Abdullah on the other side. And welcome back. Dr. Melina, as I said, is in the seat, and we got a lot to unpack. Dr. Melina Abdullah, thank you so much for being here with me. How you doing?
I'm okay. How you doing?
You know what? I think we're doing great. We had some chuckles while we were kind of off air, but you know, for some of the audience, they're going to see a real conversation because we know each other.
We know each other well.
Go way back.
Yes.
And so. But it's a lot going on in your world and in your work, and I've had a front row view to a lot of it over the last few years, but more intently over the last year. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. I want to get to what's right in front of us. I know that BLM Grassroots, on behalf of chapters across the nation, filed a lawsuit against the Black Lives Matter Global Foundation. That's very confusing to the public, the two names. So can you kind of explain real quick what the difference is, what happened in this latest court ruling, and then we're going to talk about some of the wonderful work that you and the organization are doing.
Sure. So Black Lives Matter Grassroots is Black Lives Matter. And what we mean by that is when most people think of Black Lives Matter, they think of a movement on the streets. They think of people challenging unjust systems like violent policing. They think about us advocating in the schools. They think about us standing 10 toes down for Black people. That's what Black Lives Matter Grassroots is. We have 26 chapters all around the world, and we do this work because we love our people and we know that our people have a right to freedom and liberation, and we're going to make it so. Black Lives Matter Grassroots, again, is the movement. And in 2020, basically what happened is a movement that was very under-resourced, never had money, never had a dollar or a social media follower, right, or very few of them. We were flooded with resources, and I think that there was an immediate need for infrastructure. There was an immediate need for infrastructure, and one of our co-founders, Patrisse Cullors, chartered what she called the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. In 2020, we were also under assault by white supremacists, by, you know, if we really are students of history, I would say that we were targets of policing and policing systems. And for Patrisse, who bore a lot of that, it weighed on her. And she's very candid about it, so I don't feel the need to hide what she's already written. But it really pushed her back and caused her to have some concerns for her own, not only her safety, but also her mental well-being.
She had stepped down, but you asked her to stay on, right?
Right, so she stepped down before George Floyd was murdered, like a month and a half before. And when he was murdered, we had an opportunity to bring her back, set up this infrastructure, and really the Global Network Foundation was founded in order to take resources and make sure those resources were distributed to communities and organizers who were doing work. We have always had a really good relationship. We go back, Patrisse and I go back to before there was a Black Lives Matter. She just celebrated her 40th birthday. We go back to when she was in her 20s. And so there's a lot of trust, and many of the folks within chapters also had trust in Patrisse. But when Patrisse had to step back, she left the foundation in the hands of highly paid consultants. One of them's names is Bowers. He goes by the name of Shalomia Bowers. And there was a plan in place for him to be kind of just a temporary stop as all of the resources of the movement were signed over. First, it was supposed to be two very highly respected movement folks, Monifa Bandele and Makani Temba, but when Bowers refused to show the books to them, they said, I'm not taking this on. And so what we agreed is everything would just transition over to Black Lives Matter Grassroots, which was the on-the-ground work that I was leading globally, and everything was supposed to transition over to us. After several months, almost a year, Bowers decided that he was not, in fact, going to transition those resources over, and decided to keep the bulk of the funds, the social media platforms, and what was the good name of Black Lives Matter. And so we tried to negotiate with him for about 6 months, and he refused. And so in September of 2022, we filed a lawsuit to get back our resources, our dollars, our platforms, and our good name. And what just happened is the Global Network Foundation, who has several very high-priced attorneys, former U.S. attorneys, a former Hillary Clinton attorney on their payroll, they filed something called an anti-SLAPP motion, which did prevent our lawsuit from moving forward. The judge, unfortunately, did not rule in our favor, and so our lawsuit was not permitted to proceed, and so now we're weighing our options about filing an appeal or other legal measures that we have. But one thing's for certain, no matter what, the work moves forward, and Black Lives Matter Grassroots is committed to doing that work.
I want to back you up from September, not September of last year, but to May, when the 990s came out. And that was the first time that you kind of saw the full picture of what was being withheld, where money was. And I think the public kind of, like they said, they confused everything. Like you're Patrisse, Patrisse is you, you're Black. I mean, it's all convoluted right now. And so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of clear that up. Like, what was your reaction when you found out? Because you found out in real time. And you've already kind of addressed the separation, but I want Melina in her voice, because, and I don't want to spend any more time on this than we need to, but the photos that surfaced of you and Patrisse and others, you know, in the home, it just sent a message that I don't think people understand. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of set that record straight, and then we'll move into some of the work.
Sure. So when the 990s came out, and that's the filings that all nonprofits are required to do, the Global Network Foundation had been delaying the 990s and were out of compliance for quite some time. So we didn't know. So again, to be very clear, the Global Network Foundation was the money side of things. Black Lives Matter Grassroots, which we say is Black Lives Matter, was the movement side of things. I've always only been on the movement side of things. So never took a check, never had my hands in where the money was coming in, didn't even know how much money had come in aside from media reports. And so what came out in those 990s was news to me as it was news to everyone else. I think one of the things that most people were most upset about was this $6 million home that had been purchased in Studio City. Now I do think that even the accusations against the Global Network Foundation, which I had nothing to do with, and have never been an employee or a consultant, or again, never took a check from the Global Network Foundation. I think some of those accusations were unfounded and false and meant to bring down Black Lives Matter, right? So I do think that nonprofit organizations have the right to own property, and I don't think that that means that they're engaging in any misconduct by doing so. That property, though, had I known about it, I wouldn't have said don't buy the house. I would have said buy the house and let's use it for the good of the movement, right? What if we could have this beautiful property and every time someone was killed by police, we take their family and make it a house of healing justice where their family goes and receives healing services. So I want to be clear that I did not know that the Global Network Foundation bought the house. I don't think that they're necessarily wrong for buying the house, but I never knew about it and I was actually lied to. I was told that that house belonged to a white benefactor, which I actually, there's photos of me at the house because I thought it was a white benefactor's house. That's what I was told. And I found out along with everybody else. Actually, I found out the night before the story broke that the Global Network Foundation actually owned the house.
Let's move into some of these victories and some of the work. I mean, because I don't want to give any more attention to that other stuff. I've seen the work. I've been out there.
But let me say this, and I do want to get to the work. I appreciate the questions about it because it allows us to distinguish ourselves, right? That we are, Black Lives Matter Grassroots is the boots on the ground. We did buy a property. It's called the Center for Black Power. Black Lives Matter Los Angeles actually brought the property called the Center for Black Power. It's on Crenshaw. It's not in Studio City, right? It's in Black neighborhood where Black people get to actually use it. There's free capoeira classes there. There's a Black youth space in there. It's for the good of community. So I want to be very clear that I appreciate the questions because we get to say, this is what we believe in, and we're not the Global Network Foundation.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's something that I've seen buried so far in other media reports. No one raises that up, and I think that it's important for the public to know that the fiscal responsibility you showed and LA showed, the LA chapter, is here's what we did with our resources. I've been there. I know people that have been there and been to events. You had Mayor Karen Bass come there and address the delegation.
Budget.
Yeah. And so, but when we look at, let's get to this work, right? Because I've seen it, and there's a lot coming down the pipeline. There's the festival, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But learning of the recent death of Baba Mutulu Shakur, how did that impact you?
It was heavy. Baba Mutulu has been a political prisoner for many, many years, for decades. Baba Mutulu, when I just spoke of healing justice, he is the founder of healing justice. That's his work, his life's work was as an acupuncturist. Everybody calls him Doc because he's our doctor. He is an acupuncturist. He's a healer. He understands that coming out of the Black Panther Party, that it's important that we have healing mechanisms for our people. And so you and I are both from the Bay Area. His son, Tupac Shakur, was really important to us. And so the loss is a loss of a movement elder who we loved. And he's also the father of a dear friend who we also loved. I'm grateful that we fought really, really hard for his release and that he died in freedom, that he did not die behind the walls.
And he just was recently released. How long was he in?
38 years, I believe. I believe it was 38 years.
Some say this ideal of like a political prisoner is a made-up term.
No, I mean, when we talk about political prisoners, and grateful for our partnership with the Malcolm X Grassroots movement, who leads this country on political prisoner work. But Malcolm X Grassroots movement, along with many of our movement elders, I'm thinking about people like G2 and Harold Welton and my Baba and one of your favorite folks, Baba Hank Jones of the San Francisco 8, right, who helped to lead us in understanding that political prisoners really are the people who are behind the walls of prisons because of their political beliefs and their political work. And this country still has many, many political prisoners. Baba Mutulu was behind the walls because of his political beliefs and his political work. We know that here, California has the longest serving political prisoner in the nation's history with Rochelle McGee. And we're fighting now to get Rochelle McGee freed. Rochelle McGee needs to come home now. He was not political before he went to prison, but he became a political prisoner while he was in prison. And
he has a very interesting story of how he ended up in the political prison. We don't have enough time to unpack that, but he's been down with 5 decades now?
More than 5 decades. And so we're fighting, and we want all of your viewers to know the name Rochelle McGee, RUCHELLMAGEE. So as we mourn the loss of Baba Mutulu Shakur, we also must be fighting for the freedom of people like Rochelle McGee and all political prisoners.
Let's talk about the BLM and schools and removing police from schools, campuses, and investing in ethnic studies. Like, from an educational, like, why is that important for you? I know you're an educator. You're a professor of Pan-African Studies, former department chair of College of Ethnic Studies at Cal State LA. You're also a radio show host. This is Not a Drill over on KBLA 1580 AM. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So the education work is really central to our work, right? So making sure that the educational systems that we're a part of don't continue to contribute to white supremacy. In fact, many folks don't know that Black Lives Matter are first ever, because we normally do mostly work in the streets and work in communities, but we also do some policy work. The first ever piece of policy that we were a part of was the ethnic studies requirement in the state of California that was authored by now Secretary of State Shirley Weber. And so we pushed that and made ethnic studies a requirement in our California State University system. This is in line with Black Power organizing ahead of us. The Black Panther Party, if you look at their 10-point platform, one of their points on that platform was to create an educational system that doesn't continue to, again, feed white supremacy. So we have to take back our public educational system. And what I think one of the things we're most proud of is our Making Black Lives Matter in Schools work, which is now national work. It began here in Los Angeles with our UTLA, United Teachers Los Angeles president, who's a member of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. Her name is Cecily Myert Cruz. She's the first ever Black woman to lead the largest teachers union in the country. She helped to initiate Making Black Lives Matter in Schools first in Los Angeles, and now it was adopted by the National Education Association. So every month of February, they push making Black Lives Matter in schools, which includes things like ethnic studies, and also reminds school systems that schools are supposed to be safe places to educate our young people, not places where they're policed. And I'll just sum this up with this, that the work that we've done in our schools is the most impactful work to me as a human being.
Why? I mean,
because before I'm a Black Lives Matter organizer or an educator or anything else, I'm a mama. And I have 3 children, 2 of whom are still in LAUSD schools. And what we did in 2020, defunding LA school police by 35%, and when I say we, I mean the children were at the front of that struggle, right? My kids were at the front of that struggle. Defunding school police by 35%, and then pushing an investment of $120 million a year in what's called the Black Student Achievement Plan has drastically changed my children's experience in school. And let me just say this 30-second story. My daughter, Amara, who you know, when she was in 6th grade, had school police called on her 8 times in a single semester. First for having a quote-unquote look in her eye. The second time for having slime in her pocket. Now, every 11-year-old had slime in their pocket at that time, right? That was a hot thing to do, right? She had the school police called on her 8 times. She hated school. It got so bad that I said, the teacher who kept calling the police on her, I said, I don't care if Amara just sits in the principal, in the guidance counselor's office every period that she's supposed to be in his room, that's what she's gonna do. And that happened when she was in 6th grade. By the time she got to 9th grade, we had a Black Student Achievement Plan. And Amara has gone from being a student who I didn't know, you know, what we were gonna have to do. She might have had to go to continuation school like I did, right?
we're not talking about you, but
right.
go ahead.
But she went from that to being a student who has a B average, right? And who loves school, who, the last thing I'll say is this, her Black Student Achievement Plan counselor, Miss Tyler, when Amara turned 16, we had a Rites of Passage dinner for her. She got to invite the 5 most important women in her life. And Miss Tyler was one of those women.
Wow.
And so what we did in those schools is the most important thing for me as a mama, because I've seen it change my child's life.
Tell me about some of the other policies you guys have worked on, decertification, the Breathe Act. And,
sorry for tearing up. No, I'm not sorry. Yes. So there's other policy work. So we have the Kenneth Ross Jr. Police Decertification Bill. We've been successful in getting, now it's upwards of, I think, 58 cops in the state of California from January to now decertified. Why that's important is because when police commit acts of misconduct, including killing our people, even if their department fires them, usually what happens is they just go get a job at another policing unit. We can think about the murder of Tamir Rice, right? When Tamir was murdered at 12 years old, his murderer, Timothy Lohman, he got fired from that police department, and then he went and got a job at in the neighboring locale. In California, that's no longer an option. That if you are found to have if a cop is found to have committed an act of misconduct, they are decertified. They get their, they come up, you know, for the decertification process. But once they come up for that process, if that body rules that they in fact did commit these acts of misconduct, they get their guns and badges permanently snatched, and that takes them off the street as menaces to our community. So we're really proud of that.
I mean, we've seen that here in Pasadena. This is predates the new legislation, but you know, it's well documented in Colin Kaepernick's Killing Counties documentary. One of those officers eventually comes here to Pasadena, beats Christopher Ballou savagely, and You know, it's business as usual, still on the job. And so that is obviously some great work that needs to be done. Do you think it's going to change policing though? Like, I mean, you've seen it. You've seen activists beaten, you've seen activists jailed, you've seen people speak out. Will it change policing?
I think it chips away at a fundamentally unjust system. The system of policing, and people don't like it when we say it, but it's true, so I don't care if you like it. Right?
So you mean if I wrote that there are suspected white supremacists in a police department, I'm stretching? I mean,
no, you're not. Look, the policing system comes from slave catching. So people don't like us to say that, but that's what it is. There's nobody, not even pro-police people, who dispute that, right? That's what it descends from. I don't think it's a redeemable system. I think just like we abolished chattel slavery, we have to abolish policing. That doesn't mean that we abolish systems of public safety, but policing that hails from a rotten tree bears rotten fruit. So that's biblical.
That is biblical, and I would add that soil is toxic too.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that is the system, right, in which these fruits are germinating from. People's budgets, you touched on it a little bit earlier. You had Mayor Karen Bass, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, come in, and members of BLM and community coalition organizations presented a budget. Why was that an important step for the organization, and what were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, right now, most major cities spend about 50% of their general fund on police. In the words of one of my mentors, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, budgets are moral and ethical documents, and they're zero-sum games. And so anybody who's balanced their own checkbook knows if you can choose to go out on that shopping spree if you want to, but at the end of the month, you may not have money for groceries. If we're spending 50% of the city's general fund on policing, that means those are dollars that are not available to house our people. Those are dollars that are not available to create after-school programs for our children. Those are dollars that are not available for mental health resources. And what we saw with the People's Budget Campaign, and we're now 3 years running, right? What we've seen is that people throughout Los Angeles County, including in Pasadena, but this survey was of the city of Los Angeles proper, they want to spend primarily on two things: mental health resources and housing. That means we cannot continue to waste more than 50% of the city's general fund on policing, and we needed to present those ideas to the mayor so that we can modify the ways in which she presents budgets. The budget she presented actually spent more on police, not less.
We got just a few more minutes and we got to get out of here. We're getting hard up on the time. I want to touch on two things, and then we'll get to, one thing, and then we'll get to the People's Justice Festival and what's happening on July 15th. I've been out with Black Lives Matter Grassroots. I've seen the work, right? And what message do you want people to know? Like, I've written about it, I've reported on it, I've called in on your show, Dominique's show, but what do you want people to know about that actual work that's happening on the ground?
Right, well, we're grateful for your reporting because, as we said, we don't have our social media platforms anymore, right? So we really rely on truth tellers to report on the work that we're doing, to report on the fact that when 10 of our elders were murdered inside that Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, we went back not one, not two, not three, not four, but 8 times to Buffalo to help build a Black Lives Matter chapter there so that they can begin to uproot white supremacy, which was really the foundation for that violence, right? We want to make sure that people understand that the state of Louisiana has never, ever, ever, not ever prosecuted a police officer for doing harm, for killing someone in the state of Louisiana. But Ronald Green was beaten to death by Louisiana state troopers, and we were able to show that because of his family's really courageous work, but also we were able to get a prosecution, and those officers are being prosecuted right now as we speak. We know that what happened with Jayland Walker, the murder of Jayland Walker in Ohio, that those uprisings are continuing, and even though their city and their state is not moving, we're now bringing the fight to Washington, D.C. And in D.C., we're fighting for federal policies like ending qualified immunity, and have been able to get courageous members of Congress like Ayanna Pressley, who introduced the Ending Qualified Immunity Act in the name of Andrew Joseph III, the 14-year-old boy who was murdered as a result of police misconduct in Tampa, Florida, right? The Ending Qualified Immunity Act has been initiated. So that's the work of Black Lives Matter Grassroots. We're going to do it whether there is a camera or not, whether we have platforms or not, whether we receive recognition or not, because we believe it to be, we know it to be our sacred duty.
What's happening on July 15th?
So on July 15th, we are celebrating 10 years of Black Lives Matter. We're going to celebrate with a massive People's Justice Festival. This is a festival like nobody has ever been to before, right? We're going to have a main stage with Dr. Cornel West, with Elaine Brown of the Black Panther Party, with Dr. Greg Carr, the People's Professor, right? We're going to have performances by Pastor Q and Naila Porter and many folks who are to be announced, right? All of that is happening on a main stage, but we're also having other spaces that we're calling activations. A study and struggle space. This is going to be the People's University, where we talk about the history and future of Black liberation struggle. Dr. Tabitha Jones-Jolivet is leading that space. We're going to have a beautiful garden space for more than 100 families. We're calling them surviving families, survivor families of people who've been killed by police violence and white supremacist violence. We're going to have a youth space. We're going to have a healing justice space. Vendors. So it's going to be really beautiful. And then we're honoring the mother of Trayvon Martin. So Sabrina Fulton is going to be with us. We know that this movement was founded in order to honor Trayvon's spirit specifically. And so Sister Sabrina said she wouldn't miss it for the world, and she's joining us, and we get to honor her. It's going to be a good time, and it's also going to be a purposeful time. Everything except the food trucks is free.
Okay.
And so we want people out. We're going to be doing also some electric slide and some wobbling, all of that stuff.
What time, how do people get more information?
Saturday, July 15th, all day long from noon to 6 in Leimert Park. That is the Black cultural hub of Southern California. Come meet us in Leimert Park. Again, Saturday, July 15th, noon to 6. More information is on blmgrassroots.org.
And folks, if you're not able to attend and you may be seeing this after the 15th, you can always log on to the conversation live, because we're going to be doing a live remote, talking with the folks who are participating, as well as coverage from the stage. And I know there's some names you didn't mention that are going to be there, so I won't say anything, but it is something to see, and it's something that you're definitely going to want to be a part of. Dr. Abdullah, we out of time.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brother James. Appreciate you.
I appreciate you coming all the way up here to our neck of the woods. Continue the fight, continue the good work. You know, for the many detractors, there's that many more supporters. So you guys stay encouraged in the work that you're doing, and we're going to get out of here.
Yes.
All right.
Thank
You're
you.
watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Till we have another opportunity to speak with you, as always, agape.